Holy smokes, the deafening roar and vibration inside that military transport plane was pounding me straight into the dirt. I was Jake Riley, and I was just trying to hang on. The air in the cabin was thick, man, a nasty mix of sweat, machine oil, and the aggressive, nervous energy of a bunch of young recruits, all jacked up on adrenaline. I cinched up the chin strap on my helmet and felt the heavy, comforting weight of the parachute pack strapped to my back. That thing wasn't just a piece of gear, it was my pride and my life insurance policy, all in one. Listen up, you slackers. Today is a live fire jump exercise in the good old state of Texas. The bellow ripped right through my eardrums, and I knew exactly who it was, Master Sergeant Stone, that drill instructor from hell. If any of you softies are about to chicken out and wet your pants, speak up now. Sergeant Stone was a piece of work. Blue veins were popping out in his neck, and his eyes were cold as a snake's. Honestly, I was terrified of the guy deep down. For some reason, ever since I showed up at Fort Bragg nearly 3 years ago, he'd been relentlessly riding my case. I remember once he totally fabricated a lie that I was cheating on push-ups, and he made me shove my face into a puddle of muddy water. Another time, he got on my case about sloppy rifle cleaning and made me run laps around the parade ground in nothing but my boxer shorts on a freezing cold night back in November of '98. The whole thing probably started with one stupid comment I casually dropped to another guy in my unit. My grandpa, I told him, he used to be a legend in the 82nd Airborne here. They called him the Demon Drill Sergeant back in his day. That little tidbit spread through the base like a wildfire, and before you knew it, it landed right in Sergeant Stone's ear. After that, the heat he put on me stopped being just tough instruction and turned into a personal, festering hatred. It was like he was directing his jealous fury at the ghost of my legendary grandfather standing right behind me. Riley. Stone spat out my name. His voice was all sticky and slow, like a predator who just spotted a fresh kill. You're up first. Be a man and show us that famous bloodline you keep bragging about. I snapped to attention. Yes, Sergeant. I'll do it. My voice was loud, but I knew the tension made it crack a little. That twisted smirk on Stone's face felt like a vice grip tightening on my gut. Finally, the plane's rear hatch started opening up, slow and steady, like a giant steel mouth. Below us, the view was incredible, a never-ending carpet of green forests and the little toy-sized houses of some town like Louisville. A brutal blast of wind roared into the cabin and whipped my uniform around my body. My heart was thumping like a drum machine on overdrive. Prepare. Stone yelled. I took one deep breath and shuffled over to the edge of the hatch. It was just me, the sky, and the ground waiting. I was scared, sure, but I was also bursting with pride. My grandfather had jumped out of planes like this 100 times, and now I was standing right where he stood. Watch me, Grandpa, I thought, picturing his kind, wrinkled smile. Then, slicing right through the wind, I heard Stone's low whisper right behind me. Chickening out, you useless punk. You quit right here. Before I could process the rest of the thought, a crushing impact slammed into my back. Pow! Stone had nailed me with the hard toe of his combat boot, kicking me dead center right on my spine. A choked scream died in my throat. My body folded in half, all balance gone in an instant. Instead of a clean, proper jump, I was a defenseless, twisted lump, just thrown right out of the plane and into the empty air. I tumbled end over end. The sky and the ground were spinning, swapping places faster than I could track. The wind sliced at my face like razor blades, and the screaming roar of the air made my brain shut down. I was flailing my arms and legs, trying desperately to level out, but once you lose your balance like that, it's gone for good. Inside the plane, the other recruits were frozen stiff. Hey, what was that? Riley's jump position is all wrong, one of them yelled. Stone cut him down instantly, his voice colder than a winter day. Shut your mouth and focus on the exercise. Anyone who loses his balance in a little breeze like that deserves what he gets. That's a sign of a coward. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just tough training, this was an orchestrated plan to hurt me. Falling, I clawed frantically for the release handle on my parachute. My fingers were shaking, and all my panic just made the process take longer. When I finally yanked the handle, the violent spin Stone had put on me messed up the deployment. The chute didn't open correctly. It just billowed out like a giant piece of twisted cloth, snagging only half the air it needed, barely slowing my descent. It's no good. The ground was rushing up at a terrifying speed. I could already make out the individual green leaves on the trees. The terror of death hit me like a train. In my fading consciousnness, the last thing I saw was the gentle face of my grandfather, sweating and smiling while working in his garden. "I'm sorry, Grandpa." Thwack. A sickening, wet, dull sound echoed through the forest on the military training grounds. Several thick branches snapped. Birds exploded into the air. Lying there was the young man, his combat fatigue soaked in dark, reddish-black blood, his body motionless. Ground personnel rushed forward, screaming, but Lieutenant Miller, the platoon leader directing the exercise, stepped in front of them. His voice was ice. "Everybody stop right there. Hold your positions." Miller glanced at Riley's broken body on the ground, looked at the pale faces of the recruits, and then spit out the words, "This was an accident. Riley's own mistake. Listen up, you people. Everything you saw here today stays right here. If anyone says one word about this outside of this unit, your career in the military is over. Do you understand me?" It was an absolute order. The recruits stood there, faces drained of blood, paralyzed. They were forced to weigh the life of a fallen comrade against their own future, and the fear of ruin was the lock that kept their mouths firmly shut. In the blinding heat of a summer afternoon in Arizona, Frank Riley was silently hoeing his vegetable patch. He was 78 years old now. His face was a road map of wrinkles, and his gnarled, thick-knuckled fingers looked like tree roots. He looked like any other calm, ordinary old man you'd find anywhere in the States. But if you looked close at his forearms peeking out from under his t-shirt, you could still see the rocky, hard remnants of muscle, a memory of the power he once possessed. That hardened muscle was a silent witness, proof that he wasn't just some average old guy. It was the legacy of the man who was once the legendary Demon Drill Sergeant of the 7th Special Forces Group, Airborne. Who? Frank Riley jammed the hoe into the ground and used his straw hat to wipe the sweat off his forehead. The garden stretching out in front of him was bursting with life, tomatoes, cucumbers, and corn, all thriving. The smell of the dirt, the sharp green scent of the vegetables, and the distant, buzzing drone of cicadas. It had been 12 years since he retired, and this quiet, peaceful routine was everything to him now. When he was young, his life was all grit, sweat, and the sky. He'd jumped out of airplanes hundreds of times, and he'd molded and broken down hundreds of young men, building them back up into soldiers. He held on to one unwavering pride, protecting the country. That meant he demanded the absolute extreme from himself and from everyone under him. They called him a demon for it, but every trooper who served under Frank respected the hell out of him. "Grandpa, I brought you some water." A little girl from the neighborhood called out from the porch. Frank turned around and gave her a big, grandfatherly grin, waving his hand. "Hey there. Thanks, kiddo. Always a help, you are." "Your tomatoes are the best, Grandpa." Taking the canteen of cold iced tea from her, a wave of warmth washed over Frank. The man they called a demon was now the neighborhood's favorite tomato grower. Life's a funny thing. He finished his gardening, sat down on the porch swing, and poured the cold iced tea down his throat. Just then, the postal carrier's jeep pulled up to the curb. "Mr. Riley, you got mail." Sorting through the stack, Frank's lips instinctively curled into a proud smile when he saw the familiar envelope. It was from his grandson, Jake. "To my grandfather. The training here in North Carolina is honestly brutally hard. But I love it. I feel like every day matters. I did my first parachute jump the other day. It was scary, but the view you always talked about, looking down at the world from the sky, it was right there in front of me. I'm gonna become a great paratrooper, just like you, Grandpa. I'll write again soon. Jake. The handwriting was a little shaky but full of energy. Frank read the letter over and over. His little Jake was walking the same path he did. He remembered the boy, years ago, jumping off the sofa and hitting his head, shouting, "I'm gonna fly like Grandpa." "Don't overdo it, son." He whispered the words to no one and gently placed the letter by his wife's picture on the mantelpiece. In the photo, she looked like she was smiling gently at him. After a long shower to wash off the sweat, Frank settled into his favorite armchair. Habit made him flip on the television, just as the evening news was starting. And now for the next story. The recent rise in incidents involving harassment, bullying, and abuse of power within the military has become a serious problem. The Department of Defense has ordered a full review and a crackdown on noncompliance. The anchor's emotionless voice echoed through the quiet living room. Frank's face tightened instantly. The screen showed the exhausted face of a soldier's parent giving an interview, and fleeting shots of officers in dress blues. "Not again." Frank muttered angrily, gripping the remote control hard. Back in his day, there was tough love, and there was tough discipline. But he always knew where the line was. It was about hardening the soldier, not breaking the man. He was absolutely sure that there was never any petty, mean-spirited malice or a violation of a man's dignity. The newscaster continued, especially in closed environments like military bases, problems often go unreported or are deliberately covered up. Frank's heart ached as he watched a mother on screen crying. "I sent my boy there to serve his country. I never dreamed this could happen to my son." Jake's face flashed into Frank's mind. "No way." Frank shook his head, trying to banish the sickening feeling. Jake's unit, the 7th Special Forces, was the best of the best, an elite group. Besides, Jake was an outgoing kid who made friends easily. He could handle himself anywhere. "I'm worrying too much." But in the pit of his stomach, a small, black worm of doubt began to twist. The victims Frank saw on the news had all started by believing, "My unit is fine. My kid is fine." Outside, the wind rustled the leaves. The cicadas' buzzing suddenly sounded ominous. Frank shut off the TV. In the silence, he stared at his wife's picture. Should I call Jake? No. I shouldn't worry him during his intense training. Finally, Frank stood up and walked toward the kitchen. He opened the fridge and pulled out ingredients for a big pot of chili, Jake's favorite, the one he always made when Jake came home on leave. All he could do now was pray for his grandson's safety and wait for him to come home. The summer sky was impossibly clear and blue. But beneath that calm exterior, an unspoken dread had quietly begun to settle over Frank Riley's heart. He woke up with a scream. Frank was suffocating in a nightmare, falling through deep darkness without a parachute. The wind howled a dreadful, ominous sound in his ears, and the ground rushed up at a terrifying speed. He tried to call for help, but no sound came out. His body was paralyzed, consumed by a hopeless terror. Frank sat bolt upright. His pajamas were soaked in sweat. The clock showed 4 a.m., hours before dawn. The world outside was sunk in a deep, inky blue. A terrible dream. His heart was hammering furiously in his chest. It had been a long time since he'd had a nightmare this vivid and awful. He got up to drink a glass of water, but once he was awake, his mind refused to settle. The news report about the military, the tear-stained face of that mother, and the desperate freefall in his dream all tumbled around like broken glass in his head, fueling an unspeakable anxiety. Frank ended up staying awake until morning. He went out to the garden earlier than usual, trying to find peace in the dirt. But his arms felt weak, and every time he turned a shovelful of earth, the image from his nightmare flashed back. Is Jake having morning formation right now? Is he sweating through a tough exercise? It was just afternoon, and he was eating a bowl of cold leftover pasta for lunch. A local TV news report casually drifted into his consciousness. An accident at the Fort Bragg military training grounds in North Carolina this morning. One paratrooper was injured during a jump exercise. The soldier was taken by medical helicopter to the hospital and is currently listed in critical condition. North Carolina. Jump exercise. Critical condition. The chopstick slid from Frank's hand. The blood drained from his entire body. Every word was a crushing blow to his chest. No. It can't be true. There are hundreds of thousands of soldiers in the military. It had to be a random accident involving someone else. It couldn't be Jake. He was frantically trying to rationalize and deny it when the sharp, violent ring of the black rotary telephone sliced through the silence. Jingle. 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 Frank's heart leaped so hard he thought it would fly out of his throat. The sound was like a summons from hell. He stumbled toward the phone. The familiar black plastic box looked like a dark, ominous presence. Every step was leaden. He swallowed hard, reached out with a trembling hand, and slowly picked up the receiver. Hello. His voice was a dry croak, not his own. Is this Frank Riley? Mr. Frank Riley? The voice on the other end was a hard, emotionless, and businesslike male voice. Yes. Who is this? This is Captain Nelson. I'm calling from the 7th Special Forces Group out of Fort Bragg. Riley. The name was out there now. The instant Jake's name was spoken, something snapped inside Frank's head. Sound vanished from the world, and his vision went white. Did something happen to Jake? You tell me, he roared, the panic overwhelming his reason. Please remain calm, sir. During a jump exercise this morning, Trooper Riley was involved in an accident. He is currently in the intensive care unit at the Walter Reed National Military Medical Center. He is unconscious. Clatter. Frank nearly dropped the receiver. The strength left his body, and he had to use the wall to keep from collapsing. Accident. Unconscious. The words hammered inside his skull. I can't believe it. I don't want to believe it. His strong, vibrant grandson. The one who wrote that he wanted to be like his grandfather. Mr. Riley, can you please come to the hospital immediately? The voice on the phone persisted. Frank couldn't even manage a reply. I just squeezed out, I understand. I'll go right now, and dropped the phone. I stood there for a while, completely dazed. I couldn't string two thoughts together. Gotta change. Do I have cash? Where's the hospital? My mind was a chaotic mess, my hands shook so hard I couldn't even get the belt on my pants. Calling a cab and riding to the hospital, my mind was running wild. The news called it a training accident. But Jake was sharp. Would my grandson really make a rookie mistake like that? And that terrifying nightmare. Was it some kind of dark signal? The ICU. The second I hit the hospital, I bolted for the intensive care unit they directed me to. Through the glass door, I saw what I was looking for. Oh, God. Oh, God. The moment I laid eyes on him, the strength went out of my knees. A nurse quickly rushed over to keep the old warhorse from collapsing on the floor. On the other side of that glass, the sight of my grandson was just too much to bear. His head was wrapped in white gauze, his face looked horribly swollen, and he had an oxygen mask on his face. Tubes ran from his arms, connecting him to machines that were trying to keep him alive. The only sound was the sterile beep. Beep. Of the electronic monitor, the only thing confirming that Jake was still clinging to life. That strong, athletic body was now still, like a broken doll. The happy, energetic kid who sent me that letter just a few weeks ago was nowhere to be found. Jake, I pressed my head against the glass, whispering my grandson's name over and over. But there was no answer. Only the coldness of the glass reflected the brutal reality back at me. I don't know how long I stood there, simply staring. Then, a shy, shaky voice came from behind me. "Excuse me, sir." I turned around. Standing there was the same young soldier, still in uniform. He looked barely old enough to shave. His eyes were bloodshot and puffy, like he'd been crying, and he kept darting glances around, like he was scared to death. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice dry. The young man swallowed hard and finally spoke with determination. "I'm Smith. I was in Jake's unit. I had to tell you something, sir." Smith lowered his voice even more, leaning his lips close to my ear. "Jake's fall wasn't an accident." That single sentence was a quiet thunderclap that struck the bottom of my despair. "Not an accident. Not an accident." I repeated Smith's words. My voice was surprisingly low and flat. My brain was refusing to process what this kid was saying. "What do you mean, not an accident? What the hell was it then?" Smith looked around wildly, his face pale, terrified that someone might be watching him. His sheer panic told me this wasn't some joke. "Someone might hear us here. Come over here." Smith grabbed my arm and steered me to a dark, quiet corner of the hallway by the vending machines. His grip was shaking violently with fear. "What exactly happened? Tell me everything," I urged, trying to keep my frustration in check and speak as calmly as possible. Smith took a deep breath, then started speaking, his voice trembling like he was about to break. "Sergeant Major Stone pushed him, sir. He kicked Jake right out of the plane during the exercise." "What did you say?" My eyebrows shot up. Sergeant Stone always had it out for Jake. He was always calling him things like spoiled little brat, riding his grandpa's reputation. Right before the jump, I was close enough to hear it. He definitely said, "Die here, you useless punk." And then he hit Jake's back with his boot. Every word Smith spoke hit my chest like a heavy chunk of iron. The truth, that my grandson was not the victim of a mistake, but was pushed with pure malice, sent the blood surging backward through my veins and my mind spinning. Anger wasn't a strong enough word. This was a deep, boiling fury. The organization I had fought for and mentored young men in was rotten to the core, and that corruption was trying to take my grandson's life. We all saw it, sir. But we couldn't say anything. Lieutenant Miller threatened us, saying, "This is Riley's mistake. If you say one word, your military career is finished." "I'm sorry, sir. We were scared." Smith broke down, tears streaming down his face as he crumbled onto the floor. Stone. Miller. Those two names burned into my memory. "I appreciate your courage. Thank you for telling me," I managed to say, the words barely making it out. Smith just kept repeating, I'm sorry," and quickly rushed off. He must have had a serious struggle to even come here. I leaned against the wall and let out a huge, ragged breath. My body was shaking so badly from the rage I could barely stand. Why? Why does an innocent kid have to go through this? It was right then that a steady, yet vaguely intimidating voice spoke from behind me. "You must be Trooper Riley's family." I turned. Standing there was the officer I'd seen before, a well-built military man in his 40s, clearly a senior officer, maybe a major or a captain. His name tag read Nelson. "The man who called me." "I'm his grandfather," I said, suppressing the inferno inside me and using the weak voice of an old man. "I'm Captain Nelson. I'm very sorry for your loss, but—" Captain Nelson continued, his face fixed with a rehearsed look of sympathy that didn't reach his cold eyes. He rattled off the lines that had clearly been prepared for him. "We believe the cause of this unfortunate incident was a failure on the trooper's part to check his parachute properly, along with a loss of posture during the descent. It was simply human error." He was speaking in a detached way, as if explaining a broken machine. You're saying this was his carelessness? I ground my teeth, demanding confirmation. Yes, sir. We've interviewed the other troops. They all testified that Trooper Riley, in a state of extreme stress, panicked and made a mistake. It is deeply regrettable. Lies. It's all a pack of absolute lies. I glared at the man in front of me. This captain knew everything. He knew about Stone's assault and Miller's threats, and he was still putting on this charade. I felt an overwhelming urge to grab him by the collar, slam him against the wall, and force the truth out of him. But I balled my fists, shoving the impulse down to the deepest part of my gut. Exploding right here wouldn't solve a thing. This was an organization I was up against. They had the power to crush all the evidence and testimony. If I made a scene, I'd just be dismissed as a pathetic old man distraught over his grandson's accident, and the door to the truth would be sealed forever. I slowly lifted my head. Instead of rage, my face was masked with deep sorrow and defeat. I see. My boy made such a mistake. I hung my head, shaking it weakly. I looked utterly powerless, just a defeated old man. Nelson seemed visibly relieved by my reaction. Good, it looks like this isn't going to be complicated. I understand how you must feel, sir. We will take full responsibility for handling everything else, he said. I bowed deeply, looking at the floor where no one could see my eyes. Understood. I will leave everything in your hands. I apologize for the trouble my grandson caused. My voice was trembling, but not from grief. It was the low rumble before a volcanic eruption, a tremor caused by bottomless rage and utter humiliation. Nelson said, "Not at all," and turned to leave. His steps seemed almost light. I slowly raised my head after he left. In the depth of my lowered eyes, the fires of hell began to burn without a sound. I won't forget this. I will never forgive any of you. Let them think I'm just a powerless old man. But underneath that mask, the silent, relentless revenge of the legendary demon drill sergeant began. I will use everything I built over the past 50 years to expose your lies, drag you down to hell, and make you pay. The cold shoulder. On the cab ride home, I stared blankly out the window. In my mind, I kept replaying Trooper Smith's shaking voice and Captain Nelson's cold, dead eyes. The anger and the injustice settled in my stomach like lead. I knew better than anyone how reckless it was for one man to take on a massive organization. There was no evidence. The witnesses had been silenced and threatened. If I did nothing, Jake would be processed as a disgraced trooper who died from his own mistake, and the truth would be buried forever. There has to be a way. Back at my dark, quiet house, I sat and racked my brain. Should I go to the police? Leak the story to the media? Without solid evidence, they wouldn't even listen. Worse, the military machine would crush the story and maybe even sue me for libel. It was a no-win situation. Despair slowly began to eat away at me. Then, the face of one man flashed into my mind, David Green. David Green. He was one of my troops, 30 years ago, one of the best, most brilliant men I'd ever trained. He had the brains and the leadership. Just as I expected, he had risen quickly through the ranks and was supposed to be a high-ranking executive in the Department of Defense now. He's my shot. A single ray of hope broke through the gloom. David used to call me Sergeant and genuinely respected me. I believed he would see this injustice and use his power to help. He might be the only man inside the system who could move the needle on this issue. I pulled out a dusty, old address book and found David's contact information. My fingers trembled slightly. This was my last chance. If this failed, there was nothing left. I found the number, clutched the receiver, and dialed. The ringing sound seemed to last an eternity in the quiet night. After a few rings, a familiar voice answered. "Hello, Green speaking. It's me. Riley. Sergeant. Is that really you, Sergeant Riley?" David's voice on the other end was a mix of surprise and genuine happiness. I felt a tiny bit of relief. He hadn't changed. He still remembered me. It's been a long time, sir. How are you? What brings you to call me out of the blue? I wish I could say I was doing fine, but I'm not. I actually need to ask you for a favor. More than a favor, I need to appeal to you. I explained the situation calmly, though my voice carried an undeniable edge of fury. I told him how my grandson, Jake, had been pushed from a plane and was fighting for his life, and how the whole thing was being covered up as an accident. David listened silently on the other end. I could hear his supportive murmurs, which grew progressively stiffer. When I finished, I choked out my final plea. Green, I believe you can right this wrong. Please, help me. Not just for my grandson, but to stop this from happening to any other soldier. I'm begging you. A heavy silence followed. Only the ticking of a grandfather clock broke the quiet. Then, David finally spoke, his voice grave. Sergeant, I truly sympathize with you about your grandson. However. That, however, struck my heart with a terrible chill. However, I believe it would be best if we don't escalate this matter. What did you say? I couldn't believe my ears. You know how the organization works, Sergeant. You know how much a single scandal affects the entire system. We cannot compromise the reputation of the entire military for the sake of one trooper. His voice was ice-cold, completely professional. It wasn't the voice of the passionate young man I had trained. One trooper. We're talking about my grandson. And this isn't just a scandal, it's murder. My yell made the receiver tremble. And that is precisely why it is best to handle this internally. I assure you, we will impose severe disciplinary action on the guilty parties. But Sergeant, please, say no more. Shut up. My patience snapped. When did you become this kind of man, Green? Did I teach you how to hide the truth and save face? Protecting the country isn't about protecting the organization's image. It's about protecting the life and dignity of every single citizen. My cry came from the soul. But it just echoed uselessly off a cold wall. I am sorry, Sergeant. That is my position. I hope you can understand. Green said that, and then he simply hung up. Click, click. The sterile sound of the disconnected line announced my despair. Crash. I slammed the receiver down onto the table. All the strength left my body, and I collapsed onto the floor. The man I raised with my own two hands, the man I trusted the most, had plunged a cold knife into my back. Even Green, who was supposed to be the best of us, had been swallowed by the logic of the organization. Has the military I served and believed in become this rotten? A hot tear traced a line down my cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness. It was the tears of a man whose entire past and all his beliefs had been negated, tears of fury and bitter disappointment. Outside the window, a sudden, fierce rain began to fall. It was as if the heavens were crying in response to my utter despair. I sat on the floor, listening to the downpour. My last hope had been brutally cut down. There was no one left to trust. No one left to turn to. In this immense darkness, I was completely alone. The rain continued throughout the night. I sat in the dark living room, without turning on the lights, drinking hard liquor. It was strong whiskey I rarely touched, but it was the only thing that could hold back the volcano of rage churning in my chest. Green's betrayal had utterly broken my spirit. Is this it? My tired, old face was reflected on the surface of the whiskey in my glass. The formidable shadow of the demon drill sergeant was nowhere to be seen. Could I really do nothing but submit to this huge organization, unable to avenge Jake? The word surrender began to stain my heart black. Just then. Jingle. 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 Breaking the silence, the black rotary phone rang again. My shoulders twitched. Who the hell is calling at this hour? Is it bad news from the hospital? The worst-case scenario flashed through my mind, and my heart froze solid. With a trembling hand, I cautiously picked up the receiver. Hello? Is this Frank Riley? The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, low and steady, but with a sharp, cutting edge, like a blade. Yes. Who is this? I answered, my guard immediately up. Please forgive the sudden call, sir. My name is Tachibana. I'm with the Defense Investigation Agency. The Defense Investigation Agency. My breath caught in my throat. That was the independent body, like the internal police of the military, that investigated corruption and misconduct. Why would someone from that unit call me? I'm calling about your grandson, Trooper Jake Riley, the man named Tachibana said, cutting straight to the point. To be direct, we are quietly investigating the incident. We have strong reason to believe this was not a simple accident. I felt my grip tighten on the receiver. You have evidence? No, sir. Not yet. That is why I am calling you. Tachibana's voice remained perfectly calm. Mr. Riley, there is something only you can do. Would you be willing to cooperate? Me? What could a simple retired old man do? A self-deprecating tone crept into my voice. Right after Green's betrayal, I trusted no one in the military system. This could be another trap to neutralize me. You are no simple old man, sir. You are Frank Riley, the legendary demon drill sergeant. The moment Tachibana spoke those words, a jolt of electricity ran down my spine. This man knew everything about me. We need your experience, your connections, and, most importantly, your deep, inside knowledge of the military, especially the 7th Special Forces Group. We can only investigate from the outside. But you can shake things up from within. It was like a sliver of light had pierced the darkness. A tiny seed of fire flickered back to life in my defeated heart. But I wasn't dropping my guard yet. Why should I trust you? How can you be sure I won't turn around and side with the unit? Because you are the only family trooper Jake Riley has. Tachibana paused slightly, then continued. You called Secretary David Green, didn't you? My heart leaped. How do you? Mr. Riley, the enemy is bigger and more deeply rooted than you think. They have already investigated you thoroughly. This phone call, for all we know, might be compromised. Compromised. A chill ran down my back. My hand gripping the receiver was slick with sweat. The existence of an unseen enemy suddenly felt terrifyingly real. Was I about to be sucked into a massive surveillance game? I'm not asking you to trust me blindly. But we have one common goal, to clear your grandson's name and cut out the rot in this organization. We need your help to do it. Was this man an enemy or an ally? If he was an ally, this was my last chance. If he was an enemy's trap, it would be the end of me. I closed my eyes and inhaled deeply. I saw the image of Jake in the ICU, the pitiful figure connected to machines, and Trooper Smith's tearful plea, it wasn't an accident. I had nothing left to lose. All right. I answered with a resolute voice. I'll cooperate. But I have one condition. I'm not going to be your pawn. I'll do this my own way. I heard Tachibana let out a slight exhale on the other end. Understood. That is exactly what we expected from a legend. I will contact you with the time and place to meet in person using an alternate method. And, above all, do not use your home phone again. The line was cut abruptly. In the silent room, I slowly placed the receiver back down. The despair from minutes ago was gone. In its place, a burning resolve was rising from my gut. If the enemy is huge, so be it. If I'm being watched, bring it on. Watch me, Jake, I whispered into the darkness. Grandpa is going to drag you back from the gates of hell. The rain outside the window had softened to a drizzle. A single, Sharp beam of moonlight cut through the clouds, landing on the floorboards. The next evening, I was heading to the location Tachibana had specified. It was an old, run-down coffee shop in a quiet warehouse district, a little way from downtown. It was the perfect place for a discreet meeting. Tachibana was already sitting in a booth at the back. He looked to be in his mid-40s. His sharp eyes and guarded composure told me he was no ordinary bureaucrat. As I sat down, he quickly scanned the room once more, then spoke in a low voice. "Thank you for coming. Let's get straight to business. Tell me everything you found out." Tachibana nodded at my directness and pulled out a stack of documents. They were the personnel files for Sergeant Major Stone and Lieutenant Miller. Stone and Miller, these two have been flagged for years. They use vicious abuse under the guise of tough discipline. Anyone who crossed them was framed with fabricated failures and forced out. That's how they maintained control through fear. Tachibana slid another document across the table. And this is the most serious issue. Over the last 7 years, there have been 4 suspicious deaths at Fort Bragg, all written off as training accidents. All of them involved units commanded by Stone and Miller. For incidents. My expression froze. Jake's case was just the tip of the iceberg. Other young men had been silenced and buried without a voice. The blood in my body boiled with rage at the realization. We suspect this isn't just a case of 2 rogue officers, but a systematic cover-up involving officers up to the battalion commander level, even higher. They value the reputation of the unit over the life of a single soldier. Tachibana's words confirmed my worst suspicions. How do we catch them? Testimony. We need to get them to confess to the cover-up directly, and we need to record it. That's the role I need you to play. Me? Yes. The installation's Founders' Day ceremony is coming up. As a military legend, you will be invited. That's where you will approach them and apply pressure. You are the great, legendary senior officer to them. You can catch them off guard and get close, no one is better suited for this. It was a risky plan, jumping right into the viper's nest. If I failed, I could be buried alongside the truth. But I didn't hesitate. I wanted to renew my resolve by seeing Jake's face after the secret meeting with Tachibana. When I arrived at the glass window of the ICU, a nurse rushed over, looking panicked. "Mr. Riley, just now, Jake." I looked past her and saw an unbelievable sight. Jake's eyes were barely open. When he saw me, he faintly moved his lips under the oxygen mask. "Jake! Can you hear me?" I pressed against the glass, calling out desperately. A doctor rushed in to check his status. Gathering his last ounce of strength before drifting back toward unconsciousness, Jake strained to say something to me. Tears welled up in his eyes. They weren't just tears of pain or suffering, but tears of pure frustration and injustice. "Grandpa. I'm so angry." The words pierced my heart. "You did nothing wrong. The ones to blame are the bastards who crushed you, and me, for not being able to protect you." After conveying only that, Jake fell back into a deep sleep. "He's over the hump, but still not out of the woods," the doctor explained, but I wasn't listening. My grandson's tears of rage. That was the last piece of doubt left in me, and it was now completely gone. That night, back at home, I walked straight to the storage shed. I opened the creaking door, then opened the old wooden chest hidden in the back. Inside that chest, carefully preserved, lay a single military uniform. It was the old-style uniform of the U.S. Army Special Forces from over 35 years ago, but it was meticulously cared for and still held its dignity. On the chest, the Ranger tab and the jump wings, symbols of blood and sweat, shone with a dull light. I took the uniform and slipped into it. The size was still a perfect fit. I stood before the mirror. The reflection was no longer that of the kind, sweat-soaked old man who worked the garden. My spine was straight as steel, my shoulders were squared, and my eyes held a sharp, cold light, like an old wolf before the hunt. The mask of the gentle farmer was completely stripped away. The man in the mirror was Frank Riley, the legendary demon drill sergeant who once made hardened soldiers tremble and forged elite troops. It's war time. The low, guttural growl echoed in the quiet room. It was the roar of one old soldier declaring war on a corrupt organization. The morning of the Fort Bragg Founders' Day ceremony, the sky was covered in heavy, lead-colored clouds, as if testing my resolve. I was dressed in the crisply ironed vintage uniform, my fingers lightly touching the badges on my chest. These were not mere decorations, they were the proof of my life's service and the armor for the battle that was about to begin. After taking a bus and a commuter train, I stood at the main gate of the base. My heart was strangely calm. This place, which I hadn't set foot in for over 3 decades, was my territory. My body remembered the terrain, the buildings, even the way the air moved here. I will not let these corrupt bastards control this place. The auditorium for the ceremony was already packed with invited guests and personnel, active duty officers, local dignitaries, and veterans like myself, their faces lined with the pride of service. I didn't speak to anyone, quietly taking a seat in an inconspicuous spot at the back. The ceremony began. On the stage were unfamiliar commanding officers and, yes, that man I hated, Captain Nelson. Nelson was presenting awards, his figure oozing with false piety. A dark flame flickered deep in my gut. After the ceremony, the reception began in the main dining hall. The cafeteria-style room was buzzing with the smell of liquor and loud conversations. I held a glass of iced tea and leaned against the wall, calmly surveying the room. Through the crowd, I spotted my targets at a table where officers were gathering, Sergeant Major Stone and Lieutenant Miller. The two were smiling, pouring drinks for a senior officer, the classic picture of kissing up to those above them and kicking down at those below. I didn't move immediately. Haste was the enemy. As planned with Tachibana, I needed to make them drop their guard and reveal the truth. I slowly worked my way toward them, just another nostalgic veteran. I exchanged small talk and old war stories with other vets who recognized me. All the while, my focus never left Stone and Miller. After about 40 minutes, the atmosphere had relaxed. Stone and Miller had finished their rounds of greeting officers and were now drinking alone at a corner table. With the alcohol flowing, their guard was bound to be down. Now. I slowly approached their table. Their conversation barely reached my ears. "That Riley punk is tenacious, isn't he? Still alive in the hospital, apparently," I heard Stone grumble, clicking his tongue with annoyance. There was no hint of remorse in his voice. "I know. The sooner he kicks it, the better for us." "It would be a nightmare if he ever came back," Miller agreed, downing his drink. The sheer inhumanity of their words sent a massive jolt of rage through me. But my face remained unchanged, fixed in a gentle smile. I reached into the inner pocket of my jacket and switched on the small, hidden recording device. The tiny click was swallowed by the noise of the crowded room. "Well, look here. Hello, boys." I faked a slightly slurred, friendly tone, pretending to be a slightly drunk old veteran. Stone and Miller looked up, confused, but then scrambled to their feet when they saw the badges on my chest. "Good afternoon, Senior Sergeant. I'm Riley, used to be with the Special Forces here, long ago." My, the young men these days are much bigger than in my time." "That's a great thing," I said, offering a warm, grandfatherly smile. They clearly decided I was just a harmless, inebriated veteran and looked relieved. Thank you, sir. But I bet the training is tough. I heard there was a bad accident recently." I went straight for the heart of the matter. Their faces tightened for an instant. "An accident, sir?" Miller chose his words carefully, eyeing me with suspicion. "Yes, well, unfortunately. A complete mistake by the trooper. These young guys today just don't have the guts, I suppose." Stone overacted, nodding in agreement. "Lieutenant Miller is right, sir. We are very strict about safety, but if the troop doesn't have the will, there's nothing we can do. It's a tragedy. They were completely convinced I was just an ignorant veteran. Their complacency made them talk more freely. I perfectly suppressed the burning rage inside and reeled them deeper into the trap. Is that so? His own mistake. That's too bad. I sighed, downing my glass. Then, as if suddenly remembering something, I continued. Oh, wait. That trooper who had the accident, was his last name Riley too? The same as mine. It just stuck in my mind. In that second, the color drained from Stone's and Miller's faces. They froze like a film reel stuck in slow motion. Their hands, holding their glasses, hung motionless in the air. Riley, sir. Stone's voice was high-pitched and shaky. I smiled, my expression now utterly different from the warm one I had before. It was cold as ice. Yes, Riley. By the way, my grandson is currently serving in your unit, and you've been taking care of him. I spoke slowly, deliberately, pausing between each word. His name is Jake Riley. Crash. Miller's glass slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor with a loud clang. The surrounding soldiers looked over, but Stone and Miller couldn't hear a thing. They were completely ghost-white, their eyes wide, their mouths gaping. Pure, silent terror was plastered on their faces. And no. Your grandson. I looked down at them coldly and continued softly. Surprised? I am Frank Riley, Jake's grandfather. The name Frank Riley. The moment they heard it, their terror turned to utter despair. The legendary demon drill sergeant. Everyone at Fort Bragg knew that name. Their eyes, which had treated my grandson like dirt, now realized they had messed with him. Sergeant, one of the senior officers nearby whispered, trembling. The word spread like a ripple, Sergeant Riley, the legend. The festive atmosphere of the reception vanished instantly. Every eye in the hall was focused on our corner. I reached inside my jacket pocket. Stone and Miller flinched, as if expecting a gun. But what I pulled out was a small black box, the miniature recorder. You boys told me such an interesting story just now. How about we share it with everyone? I pressed the playback button. That Riley punk is tenacious, isn't he? Still alive in the hospital, apparently. The sooner he kicks it, the better for us. Hearing their own voices booming from the small speaker, Stone and Miller's faces turned a sickly shade of gray. It was the sound of their own destruction. No. Stone let out a short, choked cry. It was just a joke. I was drunk. Miller stammered out a pathetic excuse, but I cut him off, my voice ice. A joke. That was a clear expression of your rotten souls, wasn't it? I took a step forward. The overwhelming pressure radiating from me made Stone and Miller recoil. Sergeant Riley, what is the meaning of this commotion? Hearing the noise, Captain Nelson rushed over, his face frantic. Nelson. Perfect timing. Let your subordinates explain their fine true feelings to you. I let Nelson listen to the recording. His face quickly paled. Now. Confess. What did you men do to my grandson? No one could answer. Only agonizing silence and the confused stares of the other troops pierced the three men. With a look of utter defeat, Stone buckled at the knees, collapsing onto the floor, as if all the bones had been pulled from his body. Just at that moment. Rule. A deep, rumbling sound, like thunder, suddenly roared from outside the building. It grew louder, vibrating the windows of the reception hall. What is that noise? A helicopter. The troops rushed to the windows. Hovering low over the base was a single helicopter. And the next second, a dark figure launched itself from the aircraft and plunged into the air without hesitation. Everyone gasped, stunned by the surreal sight. The dark figure free fell for a moment, then, with a sharp snap. a perfectly circular parachute opened. His descent was flawless, textbook perfect. Whoa! What the hell is that? That's not a drill, shouts of confusion erupted from the crowd. A jump from a helicopter at a ceremony without prior notice or strict permission was unprecedented. The chute caught the wind expertly, guiding the figure straight toward the plaza in front of the building. Even Stone, who was still on his knees, looked up, completely bewildered. First me, and now someone appearing from the sky. His brain couldn't process the sudden, unreal turn of events. The jumper landed softly, with barely a sound, the mark of an expert. Everyone in the room stared, breathless, at the figure who was neatly gathering his chute. The man was in jump gear, but beneath it was a sharp black suit. Mid-40s, with a keen gaze that reminded me of my own. "Tachibana," I murmured, a sound only I could hear. The man, Tachibana, efficiently shed his gear and walked straight toward the entrance of the building with absolute confidence. The automatic doors slid open, and he stepped inside. His voice, without a microphone, cut through the large hall. "Apologies for interrupting the ceremony. I am Tachibana, a special inspector with the Defense Investigation Agency." The moment Captain Nelson heard the title Special Inspector, his face twisted in despair. Special inspectors were an elite, hand-picked unit within the agency, with the highest investigative authority. Their presence meant this was a matter serious enough to shake the entire foundation of the military. "What is the meaning of this, Inspector Tachibana?" "We weren't contacted," Nelson stammered, trying to regain control. Tachibana glanced at Nelson and replied icily. "We don't need to contact you. We simply show up when we smell a crime." He walked over and stood next to me. He then fixed Stone, Miller, and Nelson with a hard stare. "You are being investigated on suspicion of attempted murder against Trooper Jake Riley and for the organizational cover-up of 4 suspicious incidents that occurred over the last 5 years. The words rang out like a final judgment. "You have no evidence," Nelson shouted, making a last-ditch effort to resist. "The evidence is right here." Tachibana retrieved a document from his briefcase. "This is the recording Frank Riley just made of Sergeant Major Stone's and Lieutenant Miller's conversation. It clearly shows you wished for Trooper Riley's death. Furthermore," Tachibana pulled out a thick file. "This is a document compiled from over a dozen internal informants who couldn't stand your reign of terror any longer. It includes detailed, corroborating testimony from multiple troopers who witnessed Sergeant Major Stone kicking Trooper Jake Riley from the aircraft." A huge murmur swept through the hall. Their own comrades had reported them. Many soldiers were shocked to realize there were other brave men besides Trooper Smith. Was this all the old man's plan? Nelson whispered, looking at me with disbelief. I said nothing, only meeting his gaze with a cold, unwavering stare. Finally, Tachibana presented one last piece of paper. "And this is the confession of Secretary David Green." "Green?" I looked at Tachibana in surprise. Secretary Green initially agreed to participate in the cover-up. But his conscience wouldn't allow it. He told us everything, stating he could not betray the teachings of Sergeant Riley. We also recorded the conversation where you asked him to conceal the crime. That was the decisive blow. Betrayed by the very high-ranking official they thought was their lifeline, Captain Nelson sank to his knees. There was no escape. "Take them away," Tachibana ordered quietly. Military police, dressed in plain clothes, who had been waiting at the rear of the hall, quickly moved toward the 3 men. "Wait! This is a mistake!" Stone screamed, trying to fight back, but his arms were mercilessly twisted behind his back by the burly MP. That's all she wrote. The war started by one old soldier, fought completely alone, ended in a total victory against the rot. Every troop in the hall watched the scene in silence. It was a historic moment, justice being served within their own organization. Clang! The cold sound of handcuffs being snapped onto the wrists of Stone and Miller rang out. It was a merciless declaration that their careers, and their lives, were over. Stop. Let me go. I didn't do anything. Stone thrashed like an animal, shouting pathetic abuse. But against the burly MPs, his resistance was useless. It's your fault, Sergeant. This is all because of you. Stone spat the bitter accusation at me. But I didn't show any emotion toward him. I just stared, calmly, coldly. My gaze wasn't pity, or hatred, but complete nothingness, as if I were looking at something that didn't exist. That total indifference was probably the deepest humiliation for Stone. Miller, in contrast, offered no resistance. He stood there, white as a ghost, like a dead man. He seemed to have realized the weight of his crime and the fate awaiting him, giving up completely. Nelson stood up resignedly and offered his wrists to the MPs. He looked back at me one last time. His eyes held fear, a touch of awe, and a look of confusion that couldn't understand why I had gone this far. He never grasped the bottomless resolve of an honest man. As the three of them were led away, every soldier in the hall watched with mixed expressions, relief, fear, and a quiet new determination as the cancer of their organization was cut out. The promise. Once the three figures vanished and the murmurs died down, Tachibana spoke again. This is not the end. We will root out the deeply entrenched, toxic traditions and culture of cover-up in this unit. If anyone objects, let them speak now. The room became silent. Everyone understood the weight of his words. This wasn't the end of a single incident, it was the beginning of true reform. With everything concluded, I quietly started for the exit. My part was over. Sergeant, Tachibana called, catching up to me. I did my part, I said curtly, without looking back. The thanks should be coming from me. Without you, exposing this massive darkness would have been impossible. Tachibana stepped in front of me and bowed deeply, with profound, heartfelt respect. Thank you, truly. I looked steadily at Tachibana and spoke quietly. I only did it for Jake. But you're different. What drives you to this extent? Tachibana's eyes seemed to drift away for a moment. I had a younger brother who wanted to join the army. But 6 months after he enlisted, he became ill and took his own life. A deep, suppressed grief was etched into his voice. He was pushed around, Sergeant. It was due to the vicious bullying in his unit. No one helped him. The organization swept it away as a personal issue. I swore that day. I swore I would never let a tragedy like that happen again. That's why I'm here. I didn't say a word. I just patted Tachibana's shoulder. Words weren't necessary. We knew the same pain, our souls resonated. You have my trust. I put all my conviction into those 2 words and turned away. Stepping out of the base, the cool evening wind hit my cheek. The battle was over. Justice was served. Yet, there was no euphoria of victory in my heart. Instead, there was a deep weariness and an inexpressible sorrow. Punishment had been handed down, but it wouldn't heal Jake's wounds. It wouldn't bring back the lives of the young men who were lost. This victory had come at too great a cost. I suddenly felt my cell phone vibrate. It was the hospital. My heart gave a sickening lurch. Please, no. Hello. Mr. Riley, Jake's consciousness has fully returned. He can talk now. The joyous voice of the nurse jumped out at me. Is that true? My voice cracked. Yes, he's been asking for you, Grandpa, he's looking for you. In that moment, hot tears spilled from my eyes. Tears I had never shed, even in the worst moments of the crisis. Not tears of anger or regret, but tears of pure relief and joy. Jake. I whispered his name, looking up at the sky, painted by the sunset. The case was closed. But one question lingered in my heart, leaving a bitter aftertaste. Has the root of this corruption truly been cut out here? Or did I only manage to slice off a tiny piece of a massive system? I couldn't help but feel that the real fight might not be over yet. The next morning, the whole country was shaken by the news. Television talk shows and newspaper front pages were filled with the shocking headline, "Legendary Drill Sergeant Strikes Down Evil for Grandson." The fact that a 75-year-old man single-handedly exposed massive corruption within the military became a social phenomenon, and I became a figure of national attention overnight. Reporters swarmed my house, but I refused all interviews and quietly headed back to the hospital where my grandson waited. Entering the room, Jake was sitting up in bed, greeting me with a huge smile. "Grandpa." His voice was still weak but full of life. The swelling on his face was down, and his eyes held a definite spark of life. I sat quietly beside his bed and gently held his hand. "You worried me, kid." "I'm sorry, Grandpa. But I saw all the news. You're still my hero." Tears shone in Jake's eyes, no longer tears of regret, but of pride and gratitude. "I just did what had to be done." I mumbled gruffly, starting to peel the apple I'd brought him with practiced hands. That awkward tenderness was all the conversation we needed. The fallout from the incident shook the Department of Defense to its core. Stone, Miller, and Nelson were court-martialed for attempted murder and abuse of power, receiving harsh sentences. Furthermore, the thorough investigation led by Tachibana's Defense Investigation Agency reopened all past suspicious cases, and upper-echelon officers involved in the cover-ups were systematically purged. It was a massive organizational cleansing. The rot that had been ignored for years was finally being squeezed out, all thanks to one old man and his grandson. A few months later, Jake made an astonishing recovery and was completely healthy. Though he bore deep emotional scars, his grandfather's battle gave him the courage to stand up again. "I think I'm going to quit the army," Jake confided one day, shortly before his discharge date. "I wouldn't blame you. I didn't try to stop him." But Jake continued. "But running away feels wrong. I don't want anyone else to go through what I did. So, I think I'll try a little longer." I was stunned by his resolve. My grandson had become a fierce warrior in ways I hadn't even realized. "Is that so? Then I have one more request." I contacted Tachibana and asked for Jake's transfer. Not to Fort Bragg, the scene of the crime, but to a different unit where the corruption had been purged and a new culture was taking root. Jake's new assignment was like a different world. Officers respected the dignity of their subordinates and mentored them through dialogue. Training was rational, with no place for irrational mental abuse. Most importantly, the troops trusted and supported each other, they were true comrades. "Riley, your grandfather is a man we all look up to," the new captain welcomed Jake warmly. "Your experience here will be the new standard for the future of the Army. Go out there and do your mission proud." Jake trained hard with his new comrades, making up for the lost time. Not as a victim, but as a proud soldier, he slowly began to heal. Yet, one question always lingered in the corner of his mind: am I truly strong? Do I have the courage to stand up to injustice, like Grandpa? Or was I just protected? Was I just hiding behind my great-grandfather's shadow? This self-doubt was the final wall he needed to climb to truly grow. Jake was on the path to recovery, but the real battle for finding his true self was perhaps just beginning. As autumn deepened and the setting sun cast a golden glow over the fields, a sealed envelope arrived for me. The sender was the House Security Committee. Inside was a subpoena requesting my appearance before the National Assembly as a witness. The discussion about military reform, sparked by Jake's incident, was now rocking the national political stage. The National Assembly? I couldn't hide my confusion when Tachibana came to visit. What does an old fool who only knows farming have to say to the nation's leaders? No, sir. There are things only you can say. Tachibana looked at me with sincere, earnest eyes. We don't need politicians spouting abstract theories or bureaucrats only concerned with preserving the organization's image. We need the honest voice of the man who knew the pain of the field and actually fought the corruption. This is your final battle, Sergeant Riley. His words moved my heart. This might be the final responsibility I owed, for Jake and for all the nameless young men. Days later, I walked through the heavy doors of the National Assembly for the first time in my life. The committee room was lined with congressmen I had only seen on TV, their gazes boring into me. The gallery was packed with media, and countless camera lenses were pointed at me like barrels of guns. A normal man would be swallowed by the intimidating atmosphere. But I was different. I was a man who had commanded thousands of young soldiers. My body knew how to dominate a room. The witness, please, the chairman prompted. I slowly walked to the witness stand. My back was straight, just as it was in my youth. The loud chamber fell silent at my composed presence. Former First Sergeant Frank Riley, U.S. Army. My voice, amplified by the microphone, still had a solid, powerful ring. The questioning began. A congressman asked in a bureaucratic tone, "Sergeant Riley, was there an element where you simply escalated this matter out of personal revenge?" The question angered the room, but I answered without changing my expression. Revenge? Yes, I had it. My grandson was almost murdered, so of course. But what truly terrified me was not the malice of the perpetrators. I looked straight at the politicians. What I truly feared was the corrupt culture that concealed that malice, that looked the other way in the name of the organization. That is a terrible disease that eats away at our nation from the inside, far worse than any external attack. The weight of my words silenced the chamber. Another congressman asked sympathetically, "What do you think we should do to fix that culture?" "I don't understand complex laws or systems," I prefaced, then closed my eyes. I saw the faces of the young soldiers who trained desperately in the mud, and the face of my beloved grandson, wired to machines, crying tears of injustice. When I opened my eyes, they held a fiery glow. But I can tell you one thing. A soldier is a son. They are not simply parts for the machine of the state. They are human beings with dreams, hopes, and families who love them. If the field commanders, the politicians here, and every single citizen never forgets that simple fact, doesn't everything start from there? It was a cry from the soul, transcending logic and appealing to the core of humanity. My grandson once told me, "I want to be a great soldier and protect the country, like Grandpa." But is the army today a place that protects the dreams and pride of such pure young men? Is it an organization they can safely entrust their lives and the future of our nation to? An organization where the life and dignity of a single young man can be crushed for the sake of its image has absolutely no right to protect this country. My final words rang out like a thunderclap. Silence. A moment of complete silence. Then, applause erupted from somewhere. It spread from one person to the next, turning into a storm of applause that engulfed the entire chamber. Both parties, everyone present, had their hearts profoundly shaken by the soul-deep cry of this old veteran. Tachibana, watching from the gallery, clenched his fists tightly. Jake, watching the broadcast from his hospital bed, broke down in tears. The voice of one old man had moved the nation. It was a historic strike that would fundamentally change the military structure of the country and the way the nation thought about its defenders. My final battle was over. I had proven with my own life that an ordinary man could stand up to massive power and win. A year and a half passed since my testimony. My cry became a massive wave, resulting in the enactment of new laws to strengthen the internal oversight of the military. Transparency vastly improved, and unjust incidents visibly decreased. Today, Jake, having grown strong in mind and body, was being discharged. I waited quietly for my grandson at the base's main gate. There was no longer the grim tension of the past. Only a calm, deep affection in my eyes. Soon, Jake, in a brand new suit instead of camouflage, walked through the gate, smiling and saying goodbye to his comrades. His face was sharp and confident, completely changed from a year ago. "Grandpa. Jake spotted me and ran over like a child. "I'm home. Good job, kid." I didn't say much. I just gave him a firm, simple clap on his shoulder. That single strike held all my pride, my love, and my congratulation. We walked side by side toward the sunset-lit fields on the way home. "Honestly, I wanted to quit so many times," Jake confided, looking off into the distance. "But then I saw you on TV, speaking to the National Assembly. I realized that I can't just be protected. I need to become a strong person who can protect others, like you, Grandpa." I stopped and looked him in the face. "You're already strong enough." "No, not yet." "That's why, Grandpa." Jake paused, turning to me with a resolute look. "I think I'm going back to college to study law." "Law?" "Yes. The strength to fight on the front lines, like you, is important. But I want to fight in a different way. I want to become a person who can protect people who are facing injustice, using the law as my weapon." Tears welled up in my eyes. My grandson was aiming to surpass me. Not by following my path, but by taking the spirit of protection and finding his own way to do it. Could anything make me happier? "I see. That's a great idea." I turned my face away to hide my emotion, starting to walk again. But a smile of unconcealable joy spread across my lips. We got home and sat down for a small celebration dinner. Jake spoke about his college plans and his future dreams, his eyes shining. I simply nodded and watched him. Watching Jake clean up after dinner, I murmured softly, "My battle is over." Jake turned. I looked at him with a calm, yet powerful gaze. "It's your turn now, Jake. You protect the future of this country in the way you believe in." It wasn't a command. It was the passing of the torch, from one man who had carried the weight of an era to the young man who would shoulder the next. Jake took the full weight of my words and nodded resolutely. "I will, Grandpa. You can count on me." Later that night, after Jake was asleep, I sat alone on the porch, looking up at the bright full moon. I whispered, as if talking to my wife beyond the sky. "Hey, can you hear me? He's become a fine man. Our proud grandson." A gentle breeze rustled my white hair. The legend hadn't ended. It had changed form, passing truly into the heart of the next generation. And from here, a new legend was about to begin.